Hi, this is Nahid, and today we're going to be talking about the pleaser saboteur. So, your first question may be, what in the world is a pleaser saboteur? And I think a good way to think about that is it possible for you to love too much? In fact, is it possible to love so much that love in itself begins to just exhaust and drain you to the point where it's not even joyful anymore? Do you give and give and give, and you don't get any kind of appreciation back to the point where you start resenting the fact that nobody gives back to you? So the term saboteur comes from the work of Shirzad Shamim. He wrote a book called Positive Intelligence. And in the Positive Intelligent book, he presents a model, which I talk about in a lot of my videos because I've gone through the training. And the reason I love this model so much is because it encompasses a simple way of understanding how you can get into your own way without having to psychoanalyze every single belief in your system. So I love the book. And if you haven't read the book, you might want to, if you're interested in kind of understanding yourself, especially understanding how you might sabotage yourself. So in the book, Shirzad has a model, and it basically talks about the 10 saboteurs that motivate you through negative emotion like fear, stress, anger, and guilt, and actually end up sabotaging your progress, even though you feel that you need them. And then he also talks about shifting to sage, which is a state of mind that encompasses more well-being. And today we're not going to talk about this whole model, but we're going to dive in to one of the most, I would say, popular saboteurs or common saboteurs, and that is the pleaser saboteur. The reason this pleaser saboteur is so common is because it sounds like a good thing, right? So we talk about love and how important love is, and we talk about selfishness and being selfless and how important it is to give to others. But then some people take it to an extreme, and such an extreme that they have difficulty taking time for themselves and getting their own needs met. And we have a story that we tell a lot, and you may have heard this story if you have a tendency towards pleasing too much. And that is the story of the oxygen mask on the plane. The story of the oxygen mask on the plane is, if you've flown a lot, you know that in the safety instructions, they say if there's a sudden reduction in cabin pressure, the oxygen masks will fall down. And if you have a child beside you, it's really important that you put your own oxygen mask on first instead of the child's. Now, if you have a pleaser saboteur, that tends to go against all of your ingrained urges because you tend to want to help other people before you help yourself. And so to you, if the oxygen masks came flying down, the first thing you would do is look at the child beside you and try to help them. But meanwhile, you wouldn't be getting your own oxygen. And as your oxygen levels go down, what happens to you? You become less functional because you have no oxygen. And if that continues to an extreme, you're going to have so little oxygen that you're not only going to start fumbling and making poor decisions and maybe not even getting that child's oxygen mask on, but you're going to start losing consciousness and losing brain power. You're not going to be able to take care of yourself. So instead of being helpful and really helping that child beside you, what you're actually doing is being harmful, because the people around you now not only have to help the child, but they have to help you as well. So the idea of the pleaser saboteur is that it's giving and loving so much that you make yourself less able to function well in the world, and you actually end up becoming more draining and annoying to other people, even when the thing that you want most is to give to them and be liked by them and to show your love and kindness. So it's kind of this real, I would say, maybe not a catch-22, but it's a real dilemma that you get yourself into. So the question is, if you have this pleaser tendency, how does it turn into a saboteur? Because it doesn't start out as a saboteur. It actually starts out as a personality trait that's really very powerful and good. It starts out with kindness. So if we think about how the saboteur develop, they all develop from a strength. The pleaser saboteur tends to grow in children that are actually naturally caring, loving, and compassionate. They tend to be really tuned into other people, and they sense nuanced shifts in other people's moods and emotions. They may even be empaths. And because they're so tuned into those shifts, they tend to immediately respond when other people are hurting. And they tend to respond in very kind and loving ways. And this is actually all a good thing. But what happens is at some point in the child's life, they begin to notice worry or fear that others won't be there for them when they need support. So while they are immediately and often there for others, sometimes they're scared or hurt and others aren't there for them. And for a child, this is horribly scary. So a child does the one thing that they know how to do, which is rely on their strengths. And in this child's case, their strength is to be kind. And what they begin to notice is the kinder and more giving they are to others, the more they get a little bit back. And so at some point, it becomes the only way to get something back, to the point where the child learns that if I'm needy, or if I'm volatile, or if I'm having a temper tantrum, or I'm crying, my parents just get stressed out and they withdraw from me. But if I'm kind to my parents or to my caregivers or to whoever my little world was when I was a child, if I'm kind to them, then people tend to at least pay a little bit more attention to me. They include me. They kind of like having me around. So when the pleasing tendencies turn into a saboteur is when it becomes an anxious way to ensure that people won't leave you. So the child begins to have a fear of abandonment, or just a fear that they won't be loved on their own, that there's something wrong with them, and that the only way that they can get love or be included with others is if they're useful to others or supportive of others or pleasing to others. Now, that pleasing behavior, that kindness, it doesn't come from an authentic place anymore. It comes from a desperate place. That's when the pleaser becomes a saboteur. So what does it look like? Because there's no trust that others will like you or be around for you without you doing anything, you tend to always be doing things to make sure that people still like you. So you might help somebody, or you might please somebody, or you might rescue somebody, or you might flatter somebody. And when it comes to your needs, you're very worried about expressing them to others because you feel that it might be too much of a weight on someone else's shoulders. So you don't want to ask people for things. And in some cases, you might even be afraid that if you ask someone for something and you become too much of a burden on them, then they will just disappear on you. So often people with high pleaser saboteurs show up as needy. And sometimes you can show up as intrusive, like you're forcing your help on other people. And that can actually get annoying to people and have the opposite effect of the one that you want. Some of the thoughts that might be going through the head of someone with a high pleaser saboteur. To be a good person, I should put the needs of others ahead of my own. And it almost feels like it's a value of yours that other people's needs must come first. And then when you notice that other people maybe don't care about what you've done for them, it feels like everyone else is being selfish and ungrateful. Often you realize that you're giving away too much and you're not thinking of yourself enough, but there's a little bit of a pride twisted in with that, like that's the right way to be, or the right, that makes you better than other people because you're giving more. It's almost like a race. I'm giving more than anybody else, so I get high marks for how giving I am. And this thought that goes along with that strength is, ooh, I can make anybody like me. And there's a little bit of confidence and pride that goes along with that. Like, I know this, I've got this. I can charm anyone or I can flatter anyone to the point that they like me. But what you may not be aware of is what that behavior comes across to others as is maybe a little bit of a brown noser or a suck up. And it doesn't look as good. In other words, people often see through to your agenda of being liked. And that can be kind of embarrassing too. But it's important to understand that when you're doing those things, people can sometimes pick up on them. Often you fall into doing things you don't want to for other people. And the way you trick yourself into doing that, even if you don't have the time or the energy, is, well, if I don't rescue them, who will? And, that's a clever way for your mind to kind of keep you in that pleasing mode, keep you in that giving mode, and kind of hang on to the little bit of pride that you get from knowing that you're a good person and an unselfish person. And that can make you feel a little bit better when you feel really alone in the world. Let's talk a little bit more about what it might feel like inside. The thing is it's really hard to tell other people what it is that you might need. It just feels vulnerable and embarrassing. Like even saying, I need a hug makes you feel small and, it puts you at risk of someone just thinking you're too sensitive or something like that. So it can be really hard to say, I need this. But even more so, some of the more important needs, like I need time. I need you to listen to me. I can't go to your party right now. I need time alone. Those kinds of things don't feel right to ask. It doesn't feel right to ask for someone else to do their share of the work or get into those kinds of conflicts. You're really worried that the more you put onto other people or the more you ask of other people, the more that they will go away from you. You'll drive them away. And the reason is it's because that was your experience when you were younger. Your parents tended, or your caregivers tended to withdraw if there was too much emotion going on. And they tended to come closer to you when you were taking care of their emotions. But this isn't really the way it should be. Your parents should be more attentive to you. I mean, you do get to be the child when you're the child, right? So there's a lot of resentment that also gets built up, and you can feel very resentful for being taken for granted, and also have a really hard time expressing that resentment because kind of at this deep level that if you express resentment, that's going to drive people away too. In Shirzad's model, these saboteurs tend to try to make themselves indispensable to you. So they tell what he calls justification lies so that you don't change this behavior. And there's a really good reason for that. The reason is because you really do believe that people will leave you if you don't keep using these techniques to keep them around. And so you keep lying to yourself, not on purpose, but as a survival mechanism. And so some of the lies that you might recognize that you think are the truth are, I don't do this for myself. I help others selflessly, and I don't expect anything in return. And the world would be a better place if everyone did this. So you begin to trick yourself into thinking that this is your value system. And I am not saying that you can't have a value system that embraces unselfish giving to others. But remember the oxygen mask story. The giving isn't actual giving unless you're also able to give to yourself and make sure that you're whole. When you're whole, that's when you can truly give to others. Now, the good news here is that when people who have the pleaser saboteur work on the pleaser saboteur and shift away from the pleaser saboteur and towards their sage powers, and they really start taking good care of themselves, they actually end up appearing to others to be more giving than they've ever been before. And so this value of giving to others actually does play out in the world, but it plays out when you use that kind and caring strength from sage. When you use it from sage, you're all filled up when you're giving, you're not depleted because you've also learned to give to yourself. And that's the real lesson and the real shift that has to happen if you have a pleaser saboteur. The important thing to realize is that as long as you're giving from an anxious, depleted, exhausted place, that doesn't really allow you to meet your own needs or ask to get your own needs met, it doesn't come across the way you really want it to come across. It can actually jeopardize you. It can lead to burnout and resentment. It can also have others develop dependence on you rather than learn to take care of themselves. So you can get into relationships where you start becoming codependent. You start taking care of people that can't take care of themselves. And the more you take care of them, the less they take care of themselves. So it just becomes more and more of a burden to you to take care of these other people. Yet at the same time, they're actually being hurt because they're not learning to take care of themselves and empower themselves. And a good example of that might be the traditional helicopter parent doing so much for their kids that their kids never learn to be independent. You can actually drive people away by being too much of a pleaser. So you would think that being that giving person is actually what would bring people closer to you. But when you do it from saboteur mode, which is that stress-based place, you're almost desperate to please somebody. And so often you might intrude upon them and give them help that they don't really want or need. And that can be annoying. Also, people can pick up when people aren't being fully authentic. And when you're giving to others because you really just want to be close to them, or you really are afraid they're going to leave you if you don't give to them, it just doesn't seem real to them. So they often lose trust in you. And I don't know if you've ever had someone as a friend who's had a pleaser saboteur, but I can tell you that in my life, when I've been around other people that have had strong pleaser saboteurs, I've pulled away from them. The reason I've pulled away from them is because I don't experience the things they give me as genuine. And I'm afraid to ask them for things because I know they'll say yes, whether they can do it or not. And I really don't want them saying yes to me and resenting me. So then I don't ask them for anything and I pull away from them. So that's exactly the opposite of what a pleaser wants. The thing that's really, really important is if you have this pleaser saboteur, you formed it for a reason, and that reason was to survive in your early life and get your needs met in your early life. But now you're older. And so the first thing to do is to just look at it, observe it, and empathize with yourself for having done it. But understand that if you're really giving, it should really feel joyful. And you have to be able to give to yourself as much as you would give to somebody else. And that is kind of that tricky sticking point, or the thing that you need to learn how to do, which is probably the most challenging thing of all. So flooding yourself with empathy is kind of the number one thing that you can do as a pleaser to turn everything around. Giving to yourself, being your best friend, re-nurturing yourself. If you can find your inner child, reparenting yourself, those are the kinds of things that you can do. A couple of practical ways to do this is to practice receiving. And if receiving feels selfish, consider the oxygen mask story. But consider to just appreciate anytime anybody gives you anything, even if you didn't ask for it, and just thank them instead of rejecting it or saying, oh, no, 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 don't give me this, it's too much. Just thank them. Another thing that can be really helpful is learning gracious ways and kind ways to say no. So a lot of times we just can't bear to say no to someone when they ask us for something. But sometimes you can say things, you can almost learn the words or practice the words, such as, I'd really love to help you. I don't know if I have the time this month to do it to the extent that I would want to. Can you give me a few minutes to think through things, see if I can change my schedule around, and then I'll get back to you. And that way you can buy yourself time and really make a decision as to whether you can help somebody or not. Setting boundaries is really, really important when it comes to intercepting the pleaser saboteur. So one thing to know is that if you subscribe to this channel, we're going to have lots of videos on this. But even more than that, if you go to my website, I not only have articles on this, I have classes on the various saboteurs, but also the entire positive intelligence system. And if this information intrigues you and you'd like to really think through how you can move from being sort of trapped by that exhausting pleaser saboteur and move to a life where you're really getting your own needs met as well as giving to others, then definitely visit the website. We also have some classes on setting boundaries, which are especially important when you have the pleaser saboteur. So definitely subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.